All right, we are officially live. Welcome to the Deconstructing Data podcast. I'm Jessie Lizak, CMO at BDEX, along with co-host Joshua Morgan, BDEX marketing extraordinaire, and of course, David Finkelstein, BDEX's co-founder and CEO. Today's guest is Ruth Burr Reedy. Ruth is CEO at UpBuild. UpBuild is a boutique digital marketing agency specializing in the end-to-end optimization of the online user journey. They begin with the optimization of organic inbound traffic, so SEO, and then they monitor and analyze site performance through the backbone of advanced web analytics and produce an exponential return through conversion rate optimization. So since 2006, Ruth has been building her expertise in inbound marketing, including search engine optimization, SEM, content marketing, web analytics, conversion rate optimization, brand building, and relationship building for links. She strongly, from what I read, believes in user education and data-driven decision-making, so I look forward to getting into some of that. Ruth, you have so many specialties, it's hard to sum it all up. So there's SEO, team building and training, agency growth strategy and culture building, inbound marketing, SEO, SEM, content strategy, search-friendly content creation, search-driven UX research, copywriting, web analytics, conversion rate optimization, Google Analytics, Tag Manager, and Data Studio, all really important tools to know. So if anyone in the audience, as we're discussing, has any data-related questions to any of those topics, feel free to plug those into the comments, and we'll bring those up. But in the meantime, thank you so much for being here, Ruth.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited. I have to say, you sent over some questions ahead of time, and I was reading the questions, just like, these questions are so good. I'm so excited.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad that you like them. And I think so too. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, especially, because we're internally always talking about this week, especially SEO and data in that regard as well. And I know a lot of our audience, who are marketers, are thinking about these things a lot too. So it'll be interesting to dig into these topics with both you, David, and as well as Josh. So but before we get started, could you just start from the beginning and tell us a little bit about you and your story and what inspired you to get to where you are now?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So once upon a time, I actually got my BA in theater. And I was studying theater, and about 6 months before graduation, realized that I just did not want the life that goes along with professional theater, because you really have to want it. There's not a lot of consistency. There's not a lot of stability. Some people really thrive in that environment. I wanted something a little bit more stable. I wanted like a 401k and things like that, and a regular schedule and things that are just hard to get. So adrift after college, I was temping and got a job doing data entry at a business intelligence company. They found out that I could write, and so I started writing for their blog. Their SEO at the time was a woman named Susan Urban, who's still doing SEO now. She taught me SEO for blogs. I mean, this is 2006. It was like keyword density was still a thing. That's how long ago this was. Take the keyword, put it in the blog, write the blog, make it look nice, share it out, rank tracking, things like that. Over time, started learning more and more about SEO from her. When she was ready for her next position, she sat me down and basically 3 weeks of the most intense SEO boot camp I've still to this day ever gone through. Tried to put as much SEO knowledge into my brain as possible. And I ended up being their in-house SEO for about 4 years. After that, I got laid off in 2008, like a lot of people did in 2008. I worked in an agency for a while, ended up going in-house first at Real Networks. This is when I was still living in Seattle. And then I was the head of SEO at Moz for a couple of years. And at the time I had met and then become engaged to my husband. So he got a job here in Oklahoma City, actually down in Norman at the University of Oklahoma. So we moved here, had to leave Moz. It's very sad to leave Moz, but excited for new opportunities, and worked at an agency here in Oklahoma City for a few years. And then a little over 5 years ago, Mike Arneson, who is a dear friend of mine from the industry for many years, was hiring for a director of strategy. Basically, he had found that being this founder and CEO had too many things going on to really run the team. You wanted somebody to kind of take on client strategy and day-to-day team management. And I'm a good friend. So if somebody that I know tweets out a job opportunity that they're hiring, I will always share that out to my network. And I that retweet button, and instant later was like, wait, job. So messaged Mike and said, hey, should we have a conversation? He said, yes, absolutely. That was in March of 2016. And I've been at UpBuild ever since. Mike was the founder and CEO. I came on as director of strategy and then was his VP for several years. And just in May, Mike has decided that he wants to take a step back from the day-to-day of running the team and running the company. So he stayed on at UpBuild as our founder and head of operations. But as of May, I stepped into the CEO role here at UpBuild. And it is still the best place I've ever worked, and I love every day of it. And it's always new challenges and a great team. So yeah, just deliriously happy with it.
That's awesome. So great to meet you, Ruth. As Jessie mentioned, I'm David Finkelstein, co-founder, CEO of BDEX. So look, we help customers, consumer brands, I should say, and marketing agencies in some ways like yours. But we help them understand their audience and target those audiences precisely. So it'd be interesting to see where this conversation takes us in terms of technical marketing, like SEO, and where that crosses over with data as well. And since this is the Deconstructing Data podcast, let's start with, looking at your perspective and what you think the biggest challenge is for brands, what that they're facing today with respect to first-party data.
Well, I love that you called out first-party data, because that certainly is, I think, the biggest challenge that all of us on both the paid and the organic side are looking at right now, is the move away from third-party cookies and into first-party data. And we're seeing that, across Google products. Certainly for me, a big consideration right now is the switch from Universal Analytics and Google Analytics to Google Analytics 4. A lot of Google's reasons for, I would say, rushing Google Analytics 4 to market. I don't think Google Analytics 4 is quite ready for prime time, but here we are. Have to do with data privacy, and especially a lot of the pressure that they're getting in Europe around data privacy and the use of third-party cookies. And we're also seeing Google has announced that they are phasing out third-party cookies in Chrome as well. And that certainly really affects any kind of marketers who are doing remarketing or retargeting or that kind of programmatic ad, display ad campaign. There are a lot of big challenges around it right now. So I think as of this moment, the biggest challenge that I think brands are facing today with first-party data is understanding it, weaning themselves off of third-party data, and figuring out where are we going to get that data instead. If we can't have that data anymore, what are we going to do instead, and setting that up now. And I do think that we are seeing a little bit of seeing in my conversations with brands a lag in terms of, I am talking to a lot of companies that are not yet taking this as seriously as I want them to, in terms of making a plan for how they are going to make data-driven decisions in a post third-party cookie world. I think that there are going to be businesses who are caught out and have a gap in data because they haven't planned around it accordingly.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. It's something that we've been telling a lot of our clients as well. It's interesting you mentioned Google Analytics 4 and sort of rushing it. I think it's important for people to understand the difference between how that works versus Google Analytics historically, using third-party cookies. Can you share your knowledge with our listeners about how that's going to work? Because I think that there's a misnomer, I think, about it, that it's going to work the same way, and it really doesn't. So I think that it's more people to understand that.
David, this is keeping me awake at night. I just got to chill, because you're so right. I think that, since Google made the announcement that the Universal Analytics is going away and you'll have to be on GA4, I think a lot of people, especially people, people like us who are pretty plugged into the marketing industry, have a lot of information. But when you think about, especially small business owners, people who are doing in-house marketing by themselves, we all know people who they're one person and they do SEO, SEM, email, social, marketing collateral. They're their one person shop and aren't talking to other people about marketing as much. It's easy to think that it's the kind of thing like when your phone is like, oh, an update will install overnight, and you install it and it's not that different. And that's simply not the case. And one huge thing about the switch from Universal Analytics to Google Analytics 4 is that your historical data in Google Analytics and Universal Analytics is going to go away. So not only will you not be collecting data in Universal Analytics anymore, but also that historical data is no longer going to be available in GA. So I know people who are trying to export a lot of their data. They're setting up a data warehouse. I know some people are just saying, let's start tracking now, and all our data now begins in 2021 or 2022 or whenever they first implemented GA4. That loss of historical data is going to be huge. But also, since the data collection mechanism is different, a lot of GA4's back end is driven more by almost like an app analytics. A lot of the back end comes from tracking in Firebase, and grew out of that code set. So and that allows them to not use third-party cookies and data centers in the same way that they're doing now with Universal Analytics, which is good. But it also means that the mechanism of data collection is fundamentally different. It means that even things that are called the same thing between Google Analytics, Universal Analytics, and Google Analytics 4 are not necessarily collected in quite the same way. And there are people for whom that's not going to make a difference and people for whom that is going to make a difference. So even if you are retaining that historical data, it's really important to understand that it is fundamentally not going to be an apples to apples comparison if you are comparing data in GA4 to Universal Analytics data. There will be times when it's the same. There will be times when it's really different. And I think also a lot of people, and I'm sure especially on more of the display ad end, there are plenty of websites who their entire business model is predicated around the session as the core metric of analytics, which is something that, it's so funny because since they announced this, I've been thinking so much about how tools teach us what's important. For my entire career, Universal Analytics, and before that, previous iterations of Google Analytics have taught us that the session is kind of the core unit of data analytics. It's all about the session. Before they were called sessions, they were called the visits, and it used to be hits before that. But that idea of I'm showing how old I am now. That idea of the time when somebody arrives on your site till somebody leaves your site, that's the core unit. With GA4, they're moving toward the user as the core metric, and sessions are much less important, harder to get, and not built into any of their automated reporting. So if your business model is based around page views, if your business model is based around sessions, if part of what you are doing when you are selling, if you have advertisers who are paying you based on those metrics, you are going to have to not only figure out your new reporting and figure out how you make decisions internally, you're going to have to figure out how to message that to your advertisers, change how you're selling your site and advertising on your site, and change how you're reporting on that to advertisers as well. So there are websites for whom this is going to change their entire model.
Yep, that's great points, and it's important for people to understand that. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Ruth, let's talk about your favorite 5, okay? And so these can be like your top 5 favorite tools to use for digital marketing, or your favorite top tech tools that you use. What would they be?
Yeah. I've thought about this all day since I got the questions, because I only get 5. I would say the first one is probably Screaming Frog. I use Screaming Frog all the time. You can use Screaming Frog to crawl your site. You can use it to. One thing that I think a lot of people don't use Screaming Frog for enough is as a custom data extraction tool. It is really, really easy to crawl your site and look for very specific things. For example, if one thing that you want to do is run all of your content through a natural language processing API and extract the entities from that, you can start with a Screaming Frog crawl that extracts all of the text in the body tag in all of your blog posts into a CSV file. And now you've got a really nice formatted file. So it's not just for like finding 404 errors and 301 redirects, although it's great for that too. That actually leads really nicely into my second thing, which I don't even know if this counts as a tool, but one thing that I could not do my job without is regular expressions. So in basically any tool that will allow you to use regular expressions gives you so much more power over the data that you're looking at and the data that you're looking for. So I use regular expressions in Screaming Frog a lot to customize the kind of data that I'm pulling out from a website. Google Search Console actually now has a lot of pretty new filtering options with regex, which is really cool and allows you to get a lot more granular with the data than just kind of out of the box Google Search Console, which is cool. And especially for a big site, can really help you drill down into the areas you most want to see in Search Console. Google Tag Manager is another place where I use regular expressions a lot. When you want a trigger to fire on some pages and not others, you can use regular expressions to really dial in that kind of targeting in a single tag without having to set up a lot of conditions and exceptions and things like that. It can all be done via regex. So regular expressions, definitely one. I mentioned Google Search Console. I love Google Search Console, or I will say Google Search Console because yes, but that's not what I meant to say. Google Data Studio, I use a lot. I would say when you're doing digital marketing, it doesn't have to be Google Data Studio, but some kind of data blending and visualization tool that's not just whatever you're using for analytics is really important, especially when you are combining multiple channels like paid and organic, and multiple data sources. There's data that you can't get out of Google. There's if you're doing keyword tracking, if you're doing competitive analysis, if you're pulling in, you can pull in metrics from Screaming Frog, run an automated call, push that to Google Sheets, pull that into Google Data Studio. The data blending there works really nicely, but there are other tools like Tableau. There are a ton of different data visualization tools. Power BI is another one. I like Google Data Studio because it's free, which makes it easier to convince my clients that they should have it. But yeah, there are a lot of options. I think that sort of tool is really important. So how many is that? We've got, okay, so Screaming Frog, regular expressions, Google Data Studio / data visualizations. I am pretty tool agnostic when it comes to SEO tools. I used to work at Moz, so I have a fond spot in my heart for Moz and their tools, and I always will. We use Moz Pro at UpBuild, but I know very few SEOs who only use one SEO tool. So, SEMrush, Ahrefs, Majestic, there are a lot of different ways to pull in SEO data. With anything like that, anytime you're using more than one tool, it's again, you're getting into that apples to apples comparison. The method of data collection and their internal metrics are going to be different from tool to tool. So it's important to make sure you're using that data consistently so that you're not confusing yourself or others. But doing just the basic SEO tools, I think are super important for my job. And then throwing in one that is not digital marketing related at all, but that has been a huge boon for me in my life is a really simple tool called Boomerang for Gmail. So I don't know if you know this, but if you change your title to CEO on LinkedIn, you start getting a lot more email. You become CEO, you get so much email. Ooh.
Yeah.
And Boomerang is a really simple tool that just allows me to say, if I read an email and I have a reaction like, I don't have time to think about this right now. Before, I would be holding that information in my brain, and there's too much other stuff in there. What this allows me to do is say, why don't you return this to my inbox in an hour, 2 hours, tomorrow morning, next week. And, I can even say, like, if no reply, like, oh, a client emailed about this. I bet so-and-so is going to answer that email, but if they don't, then I need to. If nobody replies to this, let me know by the end of the day. That just simple inbox management tool has a difference to my life.
It's impressive. That's you've mentioned tools that others have not mentioned on here before, so we have some original product mentions on here. That's
Yay, I'm
nice.
helping.
Absolutely. And when you were talking about, comparing apples to apples, David and I get into that all the time when we start talking about different, SEO analysis of bdex.com. And we're like,
Mhm.
oh, this report says, we're at 50%, but this report says 70%. Well, they're both looking at different things. So
Right.
definitely can relate there. So there are so many different data points to consider when you're optimizing your website on search engines, just to get your brand message out there. So when it comes to data and SEO, Ruth, what do you prioritize? Would you talk about keyword research or like speed data or the data that the bots crawl? Like what comes to mind for you?
That's such a good question. So when I'm talking to a new client or prospect, one thing, especially during onboarding, that I try to find out is, okay, what are we doing? And how are we going to know if it's working? And those things are going to be different depending on the business, depending on their needs, depending on what we're doing. With a lot of technical SEO, making technical improvements to a website, unless something's really messed up with it that's actively hurting it, a lot of times those improvements aren't going to see an immediate jump in organic traffic and in things like rankings and conversions. Really what they're doing is removing a ceiling for success so that you can then build from there. As I like to say, clean up your house, then invite people over. So when we do these technical SEO projects, we try to be really clear on the metrics that we are looking at. So site speed is a big one. If we're doing a performance project, looking at not just total page load times, but some of those incremental metrics like time to interactive, time to first content. Google now has the core web vitals. So, things like largest contentful paint and cumulative layout shift, which is a personal favorite of mine because I really hate cumulative layout shift on websites when I use them. So any opportunity I have to remove it in the world, I feel good about myself. But it's important that you are clear about what you're doing and what is intended to accomplish. So with keyword research, not just looking at keywords, qua keywords. So the time of just using Google Keyword Planner and getting some volume estimates and plugging those in and saying, here are our keywords, that has been over for a long time. With the advent of semantic search and Google et al., but especially Google, increasingly investing in machine learning models and in entity extraction and really trying to understand conversational search and the relationships between entities, it's really important to understand what makes a good page about a topic. It's not just the one keyword. It's about the related terms that a semantic search engine would expect to see on that same page. It's about, what are the supporting pieces of content that you can link out to, not just to show that you have a wealth of information on this topic, but also for your users. What's the next question? You've brought them to your site. They've consumed that content. What are they doing next? It may not be, I hate to break it to you, it may not be converting. They may not be ready for that. People don't always want to hear that, but it's true. So where are they going next? What other information do they need? And then where are these conversations taking place? So getting into sort of link and authority and relationship building, where off your website are these conversations taking place? How can we create relationships between these conversations, be present for them? That's just branding. It's just PR, but in a machine readable and therefore search engine readable way, so that we're driving not only traffic back to the website, but increasing associations between other authoritative entities and ours. So I think that that's really important. I'm going to go back and look at the questions. The data, the bots crawl. I mean, I think so. The relationship between SEOs and web developers has come a long way since I started doing SEO. It used to be very adversarial, and increasingly we're able to collaborate really closely, which is great. One thing that is still can be a point of contention is JavaScript. JavaScript is the backbone of the modern web. JavaScript is not going away. Frankly, there are also a lot of websites doing things with JavaScript that they don't need to do with JavaScript. I think that the modern web is over-reliant on JavaScript. And the reason that I bring up JavaScript specifically is one thing I think as a technical SEO, it's important to look at is how bots are crawling a site, how a search engine not only could, because Google says they can do a lot of things. Google can render JavaScript, but they may not. And that's up to them. And I don't like to leave things like that up to a third party. I would rather create something that I know that they can crawl, using JavaScript, of course, to enhance that functionality and all of the wonderful things that it can do. But there are a ton of things that can be done just as well or even better in HTML5 or even with just thoughtful use of CSS. So making sure that your site is built in a very usable, very crawlable way is great for search engines. It also, from an accessibility standpoint, when we talk about accessibility for humans, making sure that a site is fully usable with something like a screen reader, fully navigable with voice commands, things like that, not only open up our website to everyone who might want to use it, but also, again, these are very machine readable accessibility signals that Google look at. So it's a very long answer to your question. And the short answer is every SEO's favorite thing to say, which is it depends.
Totally get it. Yes, it does depend.
The short answer just wouldn't have been as effective in this in the podcast.
Sometimes you got to bury the lead. What can I say?
No, that's great. And actually, honestly, we're dealing with some of those same issues that you're talking about right now. I mean, we've been talking about response times and everything on our website. So it's something that every single company has to deal with. And so it's important stuff, and it means a lot that it shows that you know a lot about what's going on, and I think that that's important for our listeners to hear. And I think that it's good. It's good for you. There's always a lot that can be done to improve a site. I mean, I don't think there's any website out there that can say that it's the perfect site, and there's always something that can be done to improve it. So there's always opportunity to grow.
Yeah. And I think, too, it's important to have an awareness of what can be done versus what should be done. To get to that perfect site, there are some things that the juice is not worth the squeeze. So that's a big part of the conversations that we try to have with our clients. Is it's very easy for us to make technical SEO recommendations. It's really easy to tell other people they should do things. And it's fun, too. But then coming back and them saying, well, we can't do this for 6 months. How big a deal is that? Or this is going to cost us $5,000. Is it worth doing? We're going to change this later. Do we need to fix it now? That kind of cost benefit analysis about the value versus the effort is different for every company. There are some things where it's just like, yep, this is not ideal, but it's better than how much it would cost to fix it. And that's just the reality of being a business and making choices.
Yeah. And anytime, I mean, you said it earlier, I mean, anytime you're doing a project of any type for someone, right, you need to know, what does success look like?
Exactly.
Right. And so if you know what success looks like, what is the customer's goal? What are they trying to achieve? Then you can obviously custom tailor what you're going to do for them, in order to make sure you achieve success for them.
Exactly.
So that's like one of the most important questions to ask right up front, is to make sure that you know what success looks like for them. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question, going back to sort of, the theme of deconstructing data, and, us being in sort of different ends of marketing. But I'll sort of pose the question to you. So when someone says marketing data in your world, what does that mean?
I think the number one thing that it means is web analytics data. But most people I know who are doing certain SEO are looking at data from multiple sources. So web analytics data, Google Search Console data, data from the SEO tools that I mentioned. I also like to use, this is another tool. I'm sorry, I'm cheating. I'm adding an extra tool, but a tool like GTmetrix that will allow you to visualize the full waterfall of a page load so that you can really get into those performance issues and find the places that are really holding things up. I think SEOs would tell you like more data, all the data, but for me, it really does come down to web analytics data. What is happening on your website?
Good point. So I'm curious, if you guys don't mind, let's talk about Google's third-party cookie deprecation for a moment. So sort of switching gears, but of course, Google, they're still going to own all of that data, right? But the only difference will be that brands will not be able to use third-party cookies. So what do you think the winning teams are doing or have already done to move away from third-party cookies?
Yeah. So I do not do display advertising, and I haven't in about 10 years. So I'm not as accustomed to looking at this through that lens. But I think in either case, it's such a fascinating time. I am really excited to see in the next 2 to 5 years what new web analytics providers hit the market, because historically it's been really hard to get people to pay for analytics because Google Analytics is free and it's actually a pretty good analytics tool. So the main market for an analytics tool is like huge enterprise level where you're looking at something like Adobe Site Catalyst, very expensive, very hard to use, but the data is extremely robust because it's very customizable, which is what makes it hard to use. But that sort of level and even like GA360, I think right now we are really, the market is really primed to see some smaller first party data web analytics companies. I've already talked to a couple who are sort of in the seed stage and starting up building their company. And so I think we're going to see some exciting new data startups. I would say on either the paid ad or the organic side, thinking about first party data and how you're collecting it and starting to do that now before the third party cookie data goes away, so that you have an opportunity to get used to the data, to see what it looks like, to compare it to the third party data that you're getting, and be thoughtful and intentional about how you're going to pivot. There's stuff that you really love that's you're not going to be able to see anymore. We in the SEO world went through that with keyword data. Like sometimes you get really used to data and then it's not there anymore. What are you going to do instead? How are you going to make decisions? And I think especially with Google Topics, thinking more about contextual ads, thinking about, okay, it's less about this person as they go about their day and more about people who are in this mindset as they use this website. How are we thoughtfully advertising to them in that context? I think is going to be really powerful and something that I honestly wish more people would do now. The other consideration goes back to that apples to apples comparison thing. That's the thing with first party data is, again, each tool, each cookie is going to collect things slightly differently. Making sure that you understand how you're going to be blending that data and making sure that you're not blending it in ways that lie to you is going to be really important. So understanding the difference between the metrics that you're looking at now and the ones you'll be looking at in the future, how those are collected and the decisions you're making, all of that is stuff to be doing now, not next summer.
Ruth, that's awesome. Actually, you just gave us sort of a place to insert a plug. So,
all right.
You mentioned the importance of first-party data analytics and all the new tools that are coming out. And BDEX has a tool called OmniIQ, where people can literally upload their first-party data and get all kinds of analytics on it. So, thank you.
Totally on purpose.
So speaking of that, then what can brands do to leverage the power of their first party data?
Oh wow, that's such a big question. Again, so part of the reason why I say that you should start collecting this data now is that it is going to be so much more valuable in aggregate. So the more you have, the better insights you're going to be able to draw. One of the things that first party data can really do for you is give you really powerful insights about your users, not just people who might become your users, but people who are your users today. How are they using your site? How are they interacting with your tools? How are they coming back to you? Using those insights about your customers today can help you do things like identify gaps in between who are our customers, who do we want to be our customers. It can help you find similar audiences. It can help you do some of that sort of more qualitative analysis where you're doing things like building marketing personas, doing some like real old school marketing. I think there's a lot that people can do. And I think there is too a lot, again, going back to that idea of blending data, of looking at different data streams and different data sources with first party tools, even to try to develop insights about your entire funnel. I think there's a lot that you can do. But again, you're not going to be able to do that on the first day that you deploy that cookie. So the first time, and like everybody I'm talking to, I was at the birthday party for one of my kids' friends. It was her 5th birthday last week. And I ended up talking to a couple of the parents who worked, they work at various businesses. And I was just like, do you have Google Analytics 4 on your website? Because if you don't, you really need to. And they were like, oh, I'm going to write that down. I'm literally telling everyone I know, get it on there now, because you need that historical data in order to make informed decisions.
Definitely.
Then what can we do to protect, for the audience, what can we do to protect for the data privacy?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. I mean, the main thing is figure out where you're storing it. So, a big part of the problem with third-party cookies is the passing of data from the website to another server. And, especially the more you deal with international traffic and with international customers, the bigger deal that is, because different countries have different laws around data privacy. So making sure you really understand what happens to your data when you set up a data warehouse, like where physically are your servers located, making sure that you have insight into that. And, I think information security is something that has become way more important in the last 5 years. And I think it's something that's going to continue to be important. And it's something that I think a lot of businesses are still only paying lip service to. So really taking the time. I mean, anybody who is amassing a warehouse of first-party customer data at any kind of scale, I would recommend at least contracting with an InfoSec provider to really understand where the vulnerabilities to that data are, so that you don't embarrass yourself and compromise your customers who you care about and want to do right by, because you're good people. But get a professional to look at that would be my advice, if you can afford it.
Yeah, it's a big risk. I think that there's a lot of people that don't recognize that risk, that their first party data, wherever it's sitting in their enterprise, big or small, is vulnerable in so many ways. And not addressing that can be a risk to your whole business.
Agreed.
Yeah, agree 100%.
Real quick, because I definitely want David to get to his question after this one, but I'm curious, with your experience, what would you say are some things that B2C brands can learn from B2B, and vice versa, B2B brands can learn from B2C?
I know I keep saying that I love these questions, but I love these questions. So we work a lot with B2B brands. So I'm going to start there. I think one thing that B2B brands can really struggle with is getting too in their own head about their products. With a lot of B2B products, the problem of, hey, this is a thing that exists, is part of what you're trying to solve with marketing. The analogy I often use is, if you're selling shoes, you don't need to have a page on your website that's like, what are shoes? People know what shoes are, but if you are making some specific suite of software tools for businesses, they may or may not know what those are called. And so the challenge of going out and figuring out, okay, what are the problems that this is intended to solve? How are people with those problems searching about them? How can we create resources to help people solve those problems? That is something that I think B2C brands could be doing more of, not just trying to compete on those head terms, but really thinking about the entire customer information gathering journey. Where are they creating content that helps people make that decision? Or if they want to do more of that on like third-party sites like blogs and aggregators and things like that, where are people really looking? How can we join that conversation? And then on the B2B side, B2B companies need to get better at saying what their product is. Succinctly, that is a big problem that I think a lot of B2B businesses have. So again, I use a lot of analogies in my line of work. It's great if what you sell is a mini cocoa cake. And that's what you want to call it. But the thousands of people in the world who want a chocolate cupcake are not going to know that that's what they should be searching on to find you. So I think B2C brands have in general seem to have a better grasp of what are the sort of snazzy, the bite-sized, the phrases that stick in people's mind that we can use to market ourselves. Whereas a B2B business is more likely to say, well, that's not exactly what this is. Okay, but is it close enough that we can create some content and educate people about the difference, so that if this is what they want, they know how to get it? And I think too, targeting one thing that B2B businesses can get hung up on, and rightly so, is targeting decision makers. If who you need is the CMO because they're the one who signs the checks, it's really tempting to be like, well, let's create all of these resources just for CMOs. But the truth is that their search activity isn't going to be that different from somebody else who needs to learn about your tool. So figuring out other ways to qualify that traffic is something that I think B2B businesses could do a lot better with.
Excellent. Yeah, great points. So we're getting close on time. So I'm gonna actually just stick with, I think, the top part of my last question, which you actually talked a little bit about it already when we were talking about first party data. And it's really about brands and the importance of them understanding their audience. So talk to us about your feelings around that.
So I think that the wealth of cookie data that we have now can actually lead to brands not understanding their audience as well as they think that they do. And again, I should say the caveat that I have not done display advertising or paid advertising in about 10 years. But as a consumer and somebody who's generally, in the marketing space, it's really easy to use the extreme customization and targetability that comes with a lot of retargeting and remarketing platforms and social media advertising to get too personalized. And we talk about it like sometimes personalization feels creepy. And one thing that I think it's smart of Google to sort of reformat what they're thinking about in terms of Google topics. Like contextual advertising can be powerful because it hits people who are in the right mindset to receive that ad. And that is something that I think a lot of brands are not thinking enough about with third-party data. And they're just like, well, this person is a cookie. We're going to follow them everywhere they go. But people are not in the same part of their purchasing journey at all points of their day and at all points on the web. If I am looking for shoes for my kid, I am not ready to do a demo of an enterprise level SEO tracking software. I need children's shoes. I'm not CEO Ruth. I am Mom Ruth. It's really easy to do. And so my hope is that this change will force brands to think more about where people are in their journey and in their day when they're speaking them. Because I think great marketing feels like a service. If you can hit somebody with the right message at exactly the right time, they're not like, oh, that's creepy. They're like, that is exactly what I need. And it feels good instead of weird. So that cognitive dissonance of seeing something that you would want, but not right now, I think can be replaced by a better understanding of how to serve and delight and attract your base users at the points in their journey, not just to buy, but also across the web, where they are going to be most receptive to that message, and then tailoring that message to, again, attract and delight them so that it does feel more like a service and less like stalking.
Yeah, it's true. It's a great point. And there's so many tools and there's so many ways to target your audience, but there are not nearly as many tools to actually learn about who your actual audience really should be. Yes. Right. So people spend so much money targeting audiences, and a lot of times they're just guessing at who they want to reach. Right. They're just like, oh, this product seems like it would be really good for these people, but they're not really analyzing their first party data and understanding who their actual customers are and who the audience is that they're actually should be trying to reach. So it's all great points. Thank you.
And this has all been so good. And I know we're a minute over, but David and Ruth, as brands buckle up for the recession, what can they do? What is that one tip that you would give them that you think they can do to optimize their marketing budgets and improve their return on ad spend?
Josh, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say, I honestly think it's what we just spoke about. I think you have to know who your real customer is, who are your best customers, because if you're going to cut down on any of your marketing and advertising spend, then you better make sure that you're reaching the right people, right? And so if you don't know who your customer is, then that's the first place to start.
Yeah. It always amazes me how quick people are to cut marketing spend in a recession, because that's how you fill your funnel. And I think especially, you need to have an understanding of what what the life cycle of a conversion is. If your pipeline is a year long, you cut spend now, a year from now, when we're in the middle of the recession, you're really going to be hurting. But making sure that you are targeting things that are going to be effective and that are going to be effective longer term. That is one of the nice things about organic search, is it's something that you can build that can continue driving traffic to you in the future. But I think either way, really taking a look at, to David's earlier point, where are you guessing and where do you know? Maybe the guessing part needs to get less budget so that you can really focus on the places where you know your users are. And if you don't know where they are, then focus on that, and speaking to them where they live. So being less scattershot and more targeted.
All great points. Well, in closing, we would love to get input from listeners about what or who you would like to hear on the Deconstructing Data podcast. What topics would you like us to cover? Also, are there any guests you would like to suggest that we interview? Plug it all in the comments. We will definitely take a look. And you can also send any feedback to info@bdex.com. So share your qualitative data with us so that we can improve this for you. So thank you so much for being here, Ruth. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Had a
Thank you.
blast. And feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm very friendly. And I love talking about this. I could talk about it all day.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Ruth.